When the first bomb exploded, I opened my eyes and couldn't recognize my own sister. She was lying next to me, about 3 feet away. I had been holding her hand for 3 days straight, 72 hours. But in that moment when I looked at her, I couldn't recognize her face. Her face had disappeared, just gone, erased. And then I heard this very weak voice, barely a whisper, saying, "It's me, Liuba." My sister's name was Liuba. She was 9 years old. I was 11. We had been trapped in a gymnasium for 72 hours, knowing that at any second, the bombs hanging directly above our heads could detonate and tear us all to pieces. I drank my own urine to stay alive. I watched men with assault rifles execute a father in front of his 2 young sons. I saw children, teenagers barely older than me, forced to hang explosives over their own heads, while terrorists laughed. And when it was finally over, when the smoke cleared and the screaming stopped, 334 people were dead. 186 of them were children, kids who should have been starting a new school year. My sister Liuba was one of those 186. By the end of this video, you're going to understand 3 things. 3 things that will change the way you see this tragedy. First, you'll understand how an ordinary school celebration, a day filled with flowers and ribbons and laughter, turned into absolute hell in less than 60 seconds. Second, you'll understand why 1,200 people sat in a burning hot gymnasium with bombs hanging overhead, bombs that could explode at any moment, and nobody tried to run. Nobody tried to fight back. And third, this is the most disturbing part, you'll understand who actually gave the order to storm the school and why the Russian government has been hiding recordings of negotiations with the terrorists for more than 20 years. What are they hiding? What don't they want the world to know? 334 people died in 3 days. 186 of them were children under 18 years old. Let that sink in for a moment. 186 children. That's more than died in the Moscow theater siege at Dubrovka. More than in the Volgograd bombings. More than in countless other terrorist attacks you've probably heard about. This was one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in European history, and yet most people outside of Russia have never heard of Beslan. They don't know what happened there, they don't know the names of the victims, they don't know how preventable this was. And here's what nobody talks about, what the official reports gloss over, what makes this even more horrifying. Many of these people could have survived if it weren't for one decision, a decision that wasn't made by the terrorists, it was made by the people who were supposed to save us. The people who were supposed to protect innocent children. That decision killed more people than the terrorist bombs ever could have. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. To when everything was still normal. When life made sense. When my sister was still alive and laughing beside me. September 1st, 2004. Knowledge Day. In Russia, this is the happiest day of the year for school children. It's like the first day of school in America, except it's a massive national celebration. Families dress up in their best clothes. Kids bring enormous bouquets of flowers to their teachers. Everyone gathers at the school for an opening ceremony. It's tradition, it's joy, it's hope for the new school year. I woke up early that morning, earlier than I needed to. I was excited. My mom spent an hour braiding my hair, weaving white ribbons through the braids. I wore a new uniform. Black skirt, white blouse, perfectly pressed. My mom had saved money for months to buy it. I carried a bouquet of gladiolus flowers, huge and heavy, bright red and yellow. I had to hold it with both hands because it was almost as big as I was. My younger sister Liuba ran beside me down the street toward the school. She was wearing a white dress with a big bow. She kept jumping and twirling, making the dress spin. She was laughing. We were both laughing. The sun was shining. The air smelled like late summer. Everything was perfect. In 3 days, she would be dead. But we didn't know that yet. We couldn't have known. School number 1 in Beslan, a small town in North Ossetia, in the southern part of Russia, near the border with Chechnya. Population about 30,000 people. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Your teacher knows your parents. Your neighbors are your cousins. That morning, more than 1,000 people crowded into the schoolyard. It wasn't just children, it was parents, grandparents, youngest siblings who weren't even old enough for school yet. In Russia, September 1st isn't just a kid's day. It's a family holiday. Everyone comes together to celebrate. I remember the smell more than anything else. Hundreds of bouquets of flowers creating this overwhelming perfume. women's perfume mixing with it. September air, still warm, but with that first hint of autumn coming, that smell of dry leaves and change. The school principal, a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a bun, stood on a small platform and began her speech. She talked about the new school year, about goals and dreams and possibilities, about how this year would be special. Nobody was really listening. Kids were whispering to each other, comparing their new backpacks and shoes. Parents were smiling, taking photos with their cameras. Some people were recording on video cameras, those big clunky ones people use before smartphones. Everyone was happy, completely, blissfully normal. In exactly 9 minutes, all of these people would become hostages. In 3 days, more than 300 of them would be dead. I heard sounds first, before I saw anything. Clicks, pops. Sharp sounds cutting through the principal's speech. I thought it was fireworks. Some kind of surprise for the ceremony. Then I saw people in camouflage uniforms. A lot of them. Maybe a dozen, maybe more, I couldn't count. They were carrying assault rifles. Big black rifles that looked like something from an action movie. They were running from every direction, surrounding the schoolyard. My first thought, and I swear this is true, my first thought was that it was some kind of military drill. Some kind of demonstration for the holiday. A show put on by the Russian army. I actually thought that. I was confused, but I wasn't scared yet. My mom understood before I did. Mothers always do. She grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. Her fingernails dug into my skin. She screamed, not at me, but at everyone around us, "Run, run now!" Her voice was pure panic, pure terror. That's when I knew something was very wrong. Other parents started screaming too. People tried to move, tried to run, but there were too many of us packed together. We were a crowd, and crowds don't move fast. But there was nowhere to run anyway. We were completely surrounded. 32 armed militants had sealed off every exit from the schoolyard. Later, we learned they had been planning this for months. They knew the layout of the school. They knew how many people would be there. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had assault rifles, AK-47s mostly. They had grenades hanging from their vests. Some of them wore suicide vests strapped to their bodies, bulky vests packed with explosives and nails and ball bearings. They started firing their weapons, first into the air. Warning shots. The sound was deafening. People screamed. Children started crying. Then they fired at people. Someone, I don't know who, a man in the crowd tried to run toward the gate. One of the militants shot him. Single burst. The man's body jerked and fell, just like that, dead on the ground in front of hundreds of children. A father of 2 boys, a man named Ruslan Betrozov, tried to calm the crowd. He was speaking in Ossetian, our local language, trying to tell people not to panic, to stay calm, that everything would be okay. One of the terrorists walked up behind him, casual, like he was just walking through a park. He raised his rifle and shot Ruslan Betrozov once in the back of the head. The man's body dropped instantly. I remember the sound it made when he hit the ground. A heavy, dull thud, like someone dropping a sack of sand. His 2 sons, both younger than me, were standing right there, maybe 5 feet away. They watched their father die. One of the boys started screaming. The other one just stood there, silent, staring at his father's body. The terrorists dragged Ruslan's body across the schoolyard. They wanted everyone to see. They wanted us to understand. This was a warning, obey or die. The terrorists started shouting orders. Some of them spoke Chechen, a language that sounds harsh and guttural. Some spoke Russian with thick accents. Everyone into the school. Move, move now. Anyone who doesn't go, we kill right here. 1,128 people started moving toward the school building. Slowly. Too slowly for the terrorists. They fired more shots into the air, over our heads. People started pushing, shoving. The crowd turned into a panicked mob. I held my mom's hand with one of mine, my sister Liuba's hand with the other. I squeezed so hard I thought I might break her little fingers. I was terrified of letting go, terrified of losing them in the crowd. If we got separated, I knew I would never find them again. We shuffled into the school building, through the main entrance, down a hallway into the gymnasium. We had no idea we were walking into a trap, that we would spend the next 3 days in hell, that this gymnasium would become our prison, our torture chamber, our tomb, that many of us would never walk out alive. And here's the part that still gives me nightmares 20 years later. The bombs that would eventually kill us, that would blow children's bodies apart, that would collapse the roof and start the fire that burned people alive. We hung those bombs ourselves, over our own heads. The militants forced us to build our own death trap. The militants brought in bags, heavy duffel bags filled with explosives, plastic bottles filled with some kind of liquid and packed with nails and ball bearings, homemade bombs designed to create maximum carnage. And they started hanging them from the walls, from the basketball hoops, from the ceiling beams, but they didn't do it alone. They forced older students to help them, teenagers, kids barely older than me. I watched a boy, maybe 16 years old, I didn't know his name, standing on a chair, holding a plastic bottle filled with explosives in his shaking hands, while a terrorist tied it to the basketball hoop with wire. The boy was crying, tears running down his face. His hands were trembling so badly I thought he would drop the bomb. He kept saying over and over, "I'm scared. It's going to explode. Right now, it's going to explode and kill everyone." The terrorist laughed. He actually laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard, and said, "Don't worry, little boy. It won't explode now. Later it will explode, but not now. Now you're safe." The way he said now made it clear that later we wouldn't be. The gymnasium at school number 1 is about the size of a basketball court, maybe a bit smaller. It's designed to hold gym classes, maybe 200 people maximum if you pack them in for an assembly. They forced 1,128 of us inside. Think about that number. 1,128 people in a space meant for 200. Imagine standing in an elevator, crowded, shoulder to shoulder, hot, airless. Now imagine you can't leave that elevator for 3 days, 72 hours, in that elevator, with no food, no water, no bathroom, just standing there, bodies pressed against each other, breathing the same recycled air, until you think you're going to go insane. When all the bombs were in place, and they were everywhere, dozens of them, maybe more, hanging from every surface, the terrorists brought out 2 pedals. They looked like pedals from old sewing machines, metal pedals connected to wires. They placed them on the floor in the center of the gymnasium. 2 men wearing suicide vests, bulky vests packed with explosives, stood on these pedals. Barefoot, their shoes were off, and they explained the rules that would govern our lives for the next 3 days. The pedals were connected to the bombs by wires. As long as a terrorist stood on the pedal, the circuit stayed closed. The electrical current flowed. The bombs wouldn't detonate. If he stepped off the pedal, the circuit would break. The detonator would trigger. Everything would explode at once. Every bomb in the room. They said, and I remember these exact words because I replayed them in my head 1,000 times. "We will get tired. Our legs will get tired. Our foot might slip. We might fall asleep, and then you all die. So sit quietly. Don't move. Don't scream. Don't make us angry, because if we get angry, we might just step off on purpose." The first few hours, we still had hope. We thought this was a hostage situation, like we'd seen on television. There would be negotiations. The terrorists would make their demands. The government would agree to something. They would free us. This would end quickly, maybe by evening. We would go home. We would hug our families. We would cry and be grateful and promise to never take safety for granted again. But time kept passing. Minutes turned into hours. Evening came, and we were still there. The heat inside the gymnasium became unbearable. It was September in southern Russia. Still summer weather. The sun beating down on the metal roof all day. Inside the sealed gymnasium, with 1,100 bodies packed together, generating heat, breathing, sweating. It must have been over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Maybe closer to 110. I don't know. It felt like an oven. Like we were being slowly cooked alive. The terrorists forced the children to stand, for hours. Just stand there in the suffocating heat. You couldn't sit down, couldn't lean against the wall, couldn't rest, just stand. The younger kids, the 5-year-olds, the 6-year-olds, their legs started shaking, they couldn't hold themselves up. They started fainting, collapsing onto the floor. Sometimes the terrorists would drag them outside, spray them with cold water from a garden hose, slap them awake, and then drag them back inside, back into the oven, back into the nightmare. By evening of the first day, the bathroom situation became unbearable. 1,128 people, hundreds of children, dozens of babies and toddlers. The bathrooms were locked. The terrorists wouldn't let anyone use them. They said, "Hold it, control yourself." But you can't control your body for 3 days. You can't just decide not to need a bathroom for 72 hours. People started relieving themselves in corners of the gymnasium. Mothers held up coats to give their children some privacy, some tiny shred of dignity. But there was no privacy. Everyone could see, everyone could smell. The smell became indescribable. Human waste mixed with sweat and fear and that metallic smell of blood from people who'd been beaten or shot. It got into your throat. You couldn't escape it. You breathed it with every breath. This was only the first night, the first 12 hours. We didn't yet know that the worst was still ahead of us, that the real horror hadn't even begun. On the second day, they gave us no water, not a single drop. And the heat was killing us slower and more painfully than any bullet could. Children were crying, begging their mothers, "Mommy, I'm so thirsty. Please, I need water." But the mothers had nothing to give. They were dying of thirst themselves. Their lips were cracked and bleeding, their mouths so dry they could barely speak. Some mothers tried to produce saliva to wet their children's lips, but there was no moisture left in their bodies. Many people started undressing, stripping off their clothes because of the unbearable heat. Kids took off their shirts and dresses. Some older teenagers removed almost everything, sitting in their underwear, trying to cool down even a fraction of a degree. Later, after everything was over, this fact spawned horrifying rumors. People who weren't there claimed the terrorists had stripped the children, that they'd violated them. They didn't. We undressed ourselves, out of desperation, out of the physical agony of overheating. But the rumors persisted anyway, adding another layer of cruelty to an already unbearable tragedy. By midday of the second day, around noon when the sun was directly overhead and the metal roof was radiating heat like a furnace, people started drinking their own urine. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I'm not going to make it sound less awful than it was. People were so desperately thirsty that they drank their own urine. Yes, it's disgusting. Yes, it's one of the most humiliating things a human being can do. But when your throat becomes so dry that you can't swallow your own spit, when your tongue feels like sandpaper, when you're so dehydrated that you stop sweating because your body has no water left to give, you'll do anything. You'll abandon dignity. You'll abandon shame. You'll do whatever it takes to survive one more hour. I saw a woman, a mother in her 30s, wearing a floral dress that was soaked with sweat, take off her plastic shoe, one of those cheap plastic sandals. She tried to urinate into it, to collect the liquid in the curve of the shoe so she could give it to her daughter. The little girl was maybe 5 years old, wearing a white dress with pink flowers that was now gray with dirt. The child was crying, shaking her head, saying, "No, Mommy, no, I don't want to." But the mother forced her. She held the back of her daughter's head and brought the shoe to her lips and said, "Drink it or you'll die. Drink it now." The girl drank. I watched her gag and cry and drink. And I looked away because I couldn't bear to see the look on that mother's face. The shame, the desperation, the knowledge that she was forcing her child to do something that would scar her forever. But it was the only way to keep her alive. On the second day, something changed. A man arrived. His name was Ruslan Aushev, and he was the former president of Ingushetia, a neighboring Russian republic. Somehow he'd negotiated permission to enter the school and speak with the terrorists. We heard later that he had connections, that he was a respected figure, even among Chechen separatists. He talked with the terrorist leaders for more than an hour. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but we could see them through the gymnasium windows, standing in the hallway, arguing, gesturing. We had hope then, real hope. We thought maybe he would convince them to let us go. Maybe he would end this nightmare. He didn't. The terrorists refused to release everyone, but they agreed to one thing, one small concession that they framed as mercy. They would release nursing mothers with infants. Women who had babies young enough to still be breastfeeding could leave. Take your baby and go. That sounds like a humanitarian gesture, doesn't it? It sounds like the terrorists showing some sliver of compassion. It was the opposite. It was cruelty disguised as kindness. Because many of these mothers had older children too. 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds. And the terrorists made the rules very clear. You can take your nursing infant and leave. One child, the rest of your children stay here. Choose. What choice can a mother possibly make in that situation? Who do you save? The infant who can't survive without you, who will die without breast milk? Or your older child who's begging you not to leave, who's clutching your arm, who's screaming, "Mommy, don't go, don't leave me here." How do you choose which child lives and which child dies? Some mothers made the choice. They took their babies and left, and you could hear them sobbing as they walked out of the building, their older children's screams following them. Other mothers couldn't do it. They refused. They said, "I won't leave without all my children. I'd rather die here with them than live knowing I abandoned them." One woman, I didn't know her name then, but I learned it later, refused to leave. She was holding a baby, maybe 6 months old, but she had a 7-year-old son sitting next to her. When the terrorists told her to take the baby and go, she said no. She said, "I'm staying with my son. I won't leave him." Ruslan Aushev, who was trying to save as many people as he could, took the baby from her arms. She tried to hold on, but he pulled the infant away and carried him out himself. The baby survived. The woman and her 7-year-old son both died when the explosion started the next day. I think about her a lot. I think about whether she made the right choice. I think about what I would have done. I don't have an answer. You know what the terrorists wanted? What their demands were? Ask most people, even people who've heard of Beslan, and they'll tell you the terrorists were just monsters, fanatics, crazy people who wanted to kill for no reason. The Russian government certainly pushed that narrative. The official version from Moscow was that there were no demands, no political goals, just senseless violence by irrational extremists. That's a lie. A complete, deliberate lie told to make this situation seem simpler than it was, to avoid uncomfortable political questions. The terrorists handed over a written note on the first day, a clear list of demands. The primary demand was recognition of Chechen independence. They wanted Russia to acknowledge that Chechnya was an independent nation, not a Russian territory. They wanted Russian troops withdrawn from Chechnya. They wanted the war to end. These were political demands, specific, concrete political demands. Russian authorities received this note. Government officials read it. They knew exactly what the terrorists wanted, and then they hid it. They told the media, told the world, that no demands had been made. They said the terrorists were irrational actors who couldn't be negotiated with. Why lie about this? Because acknowledging the demands would mean acknowledging the political context. It would mean admitting that the war in Chechnya, which the Russian government insisted was necessary and justified, had consequences. That it created enemies who were willing to die and kill children to make a point. The terrorists also handed over a videotape on the second day. They recorded a statement explaining their actions, explaining why they'd taken a school hostage, why they were willing to die. They gave this tape to Russian negotiators. The authorities claimed the tape was blank. They said the terrorists had handed over an empty cassette, that there was nothing recorded on it. Years later, forensic experts examined that tape. They proved conclusively that it wasn't blank. There is a recording on it, there are voices, there is content. But that content has never been released. It remains classified by the Russian government to this day, more than 20 years later. What's on that tape? What did the terrorists say that was so dangerous the government couldn't let anyone hear it? September 3rd, the third morning. Dawn broke and we were still there, still trapped, still dying slowly. Most of us hadn't slept at all during the night. How could you sleep? You're sitting on a hard floor, packed against other bodies, in unbearable heat, with bombs hanging over your head, with armed men walking around who've already proven they'll kill without hesitation. Children were delirious. Some were hallucinating from dehydration. I saw a little boy, maybe 6 years old, having a conversation with someone who wasn't there, talking to empty air. His mother was holding him, rocking him, crying. Some people were lying completely still. You couldn't tell if they were unconscious or dead. Nobody checked. What would be the point? Around noon on September 3rd, something changed. You could feel it in the air, a shift in energy. The terrorists started acting differently. They were nervous, agitated. They started talking to each other more urgently, arguing in Chechen. Some of them moved to the windows, looking outside, watching something. We couldn't see what they were seeing, but we knew something was happening. Something was about to happen. Then we heard sounds from outside. Mechanical sounds, engines, something heavy moving, military vehicles maybe, we didn't know. One of the terrorists, a young man with a beard, maybe in his 20s, suddenly screamed something in Chechen. He grabbed his rifle and ran to one of the windows. Other terrorists started moving, taking defensive positions. They knew what was coming. At that moment, though we didn't know it yet, we had less than 20 minutes left to live. At least 334 of us did. Then it happened. The explosion. The first explosion. To this day, 20 years later, nobody knows for certain what caused it. The official Russian government investigation concluded it was an accident. They said one of the terrorists standing on the detonator pedals got tired, his leg gave out, he stepped off the pedal, and the circuit broke. Boom. But multiple eyewitnesses, survivors who were there, who saw what happened, tell a different story. They say they saw something come through the window, a projectile, a grenade maybe, fired from outside. They say Russian special forces initiated the assault. They say the government stormed the building and triggered the explosions. The truth is probably buried in those classified files, in those recordings the government won't release. But here's what I know, here's what I experienced. The blast wave hit like a physical punch, like being hit by a car. I was sitting on the floor and suddenly I was flying through the air. I slammed into other bodies, into the wall I don't even remember. My ears went instantly deaf. Complete silence, except for this high-pitched ringing that drowned out everything else. I couldn't hear the screaming. I couldn't hear the secondary explosions, just this endless ringing tone. Then the bombs started detonating in sequence, one after another, chain reaction. The devices the terrorists had spent 2 days hanging all over the gymnasium were exploding, each one packed with nails and ball bearings and metal fragments designed to shred human flesh. The ceiling started collapsing. Wooden beams, heavy beams that held up the roof, snapping and falling. I saw a beam, must have weighed hundreds of pounds, fall directly onto a group of people. They disappeared under it, just gone. Fire started immediately. The explosives, the burning debris, something ignited, flames spreading across the floor, up the walls, consuming everything. I opened my eyes. I don't remember closing them, but I must have. I opened my eyes and I didn't understand what I was seeing. Everything was smoke and dust. Gray smoke so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet. Bodies everywhere, or pieces of bodies. I'm not going to describe in detail what a bomb filled with nails does to a human body. Use your imagination. Or better yet, don't. I couldn't process it. My brain couldn't make sense of what my eyes were showing me. This had been a gymnasium full of people. People I knew, neighbors, classmates. Now it was a slaughterhouse. Blood on every surface. The smell of burning flesh mixing with smoke. That smell got into my nose, my throat, my lungs. I can still smell it sometimes, 20 years later, when I close my eyes. I looked around frantically, trying to find my mother, my sister. I couldn't see them. The smoke was too thick. I tried to call out, but my voice wasn't working. My throat was too dry, too damaged by smoke. I crawled, on my hands and knees, through blood, over bodies. Some of them were moving, making sounds. Most weren't. I found my mother first. She was lying on her side, her eyes closed. I shook her. She didn't respond. I don't know if she was dead or unconscious. I couldn't tell. I had to keep moving. I had to find Lyuba. Then I heard it, that voice. So weak, I almost missed it. It's me, Lyuba. I turned toward the sound. About 3 feet away, maybe less, there was someone lying on the floor. A small shape. I crawled closer. I looked at the face. I couldn't recognize it. The features were wrong. Distorted. Damaged. I stared at this person, and I genuinely did not know who it was. Then the voice came again. It's me, your sister. It was Lyuba, my 9-year-old sister. I had been holding her hand for 3 days. I had slept next to her, shared my small sips of stolen water with her, promised her we would survive this together. And now, looking directly at her from 3 feet away, I couldn't recognize her face. The explosion had done something to her, changed her, erased the features I knew. I reached out and touched her hand. It was still warm. She was alive. She was badly hurt, but she was alive. I had to get her out. Gunfire started, automatic weapons firing in bursts. I couldn't tell who was shooting or where it was coming from. The terrorists shooting at special forces? Special forces shooting at terrorists? Both? The sounds were coming from every direction. People were running. The ones who could still move were trying to get out. The main doors were blocked by debris. Some people were climbing toward the windows. I saw a boy, maybe 13 years old, pull himself up to a second-story window and jump out. Just jumped. Fell 20 feet to the ground outside. I don't know if he survived. I saw a terrorist, one of the men who'd been guarding us, on fire, his whole body burning. He was running, screaming, firing his weapon randomly. Then he collapsed. I grabbed Lyuba under her arms and started dragging her. She was heavy, or I was weak. Probably both. I pulled her across the floor, toward where I thought the exit might be. She was whispering something, but I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. I kept dragging. My hands were slipping on her skin, slippery with blood. I didn't know if it was her blood or mine or someone else's. I just kept pulling. We made it to a hallway. There were other children there. Some sitting against the wall, staring at nothing, others crying. One girl, maybe 10 years old, was screaming for her mother over and over. No one answered her. I laid Lyuba down on the floor of the hallway. I told her, "Wait here, I'm going to find help. I'll be right back." "Just wait here." She looked at me. Her eyes were unfocused. She nodded slightly. I ran. I don't know how long I was gone. Minutes, maybe. It felt like hours. I ran through smoke-filled hallways looking for adults, for rescue workers, for anyone who could help. I found a man in a uniform, Russian military, I think, or special forces. I grabbed his arm and tried to tell him about my sister, about where she was. He pushed past me. Too many people to save. Too much chaos. I ran back to where I'd left Lyuba. She was exactly where I'd left her, lying on her back in the hallway, but she wasn't moving anymore. I knelt down next to her. I shook her shoulder. Lyuba, wake up. We have to go now." She didn't respond. I put my hand on her chest. Nothing, no movement, no breath. I don't remember what I did next. My memory just stops there, goes blank. The next thing I clearly remember is being outside the school, sitting on grass, wrapped in someone's jacket, watching the building burn. Outside the school, it was chaos. Parents who had been standing vigil for 3 days, waiting, praying, hoping their children were still alive. They broke through police barriers when they saw kids running from the building. They ran toward the school, toward the gunfire, toward the explosions. Russian special forces were screaming at them to stay back, that it was dangerous, that they could be killed. The parents didn't care. Their children were in there. I saw one father, a big man with a beard, wearing a torn shirt, running full speed toward the building. A boy was stuck in a second-floor window, half in and half out, unable to move forward or back. The school was on fire behind him. The father ran. Special forces soldiers tried to grab him, tried to hold him back. He broke free and kept running. He reached the wall, climbed up somehow, grabbed his son and pulled him free. They both fell to the ground together. Then gunfire erupted. I don't know who was shooting. I saw the father's body jerk. He wrapped himself around his son, covering him. Both of them were hit. The father managed to drag his son several feet away from the building before he collapsed. His son died in his arms. Outside the building, so close to safety. But the father had gotten him out. That was all that mattered to him in those final seconds. The siege officially ended late in the afternoon on September 3rd. Russian special forces secured the building. The surviving terrorists were either killed or captured. The fires were eventually put out. And then came the counting. The terrible, methodical counting of bodies. 334 hostages dead. 186 of them children. 70 more would die from their injuries in the following days and weeks. More than 700 people wounded, many of them catastrophically. Burns covering most of their bodies. Limbs blown off. Shrapnel embedded in their organs. Some of those survivors are still in hospitals today, 20 years later, still receiving treatment for injuries that will never fully heal. My sister Lyuba was one of the 186 children who died. She was 9 years old. She lived 9 years, 8 months, and 3 days. She died on the floor of a school hallway while I ran looking for help that came too late. When they counted the dead, when they made the list, she became a statistic. Child number 47. Or maybe it was 82, I don't remember. The numbers blur together. But she wasn't a number. She was a little girl who loved drawing pictures of flowers, who wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, who laughed at stupid jokes, who held my hand when she was scared, who died terrified and in pain while I was somewhere else. In the days after, I learned about other families, other losses. There was a family that lost 4 children out of 5. 4. The only survivor was a 13-year-old girl named Medina. She had been holding hands with her siblings when the explosion started. The blast tore their hands apart. When she woke up, they were gone. All of them. She was the only one left. I met her months later at a memorial service. We didn't speak. What could we possibly say to each other? We just stood there, two girls who survived when we shouldn't have, carrying guilt that would never go away. There were mothers who lost every single one of their children. I spoke to one woman, years later, who had 3 kids. All 3 died in the gymnasium. She told me she wished she had died too, that surviving was the cruelest punishment. She said, "Every morning I wake up and for a few seconds I forget, then I remember, and I have to live through losing them all over again every single day." There are children who lost both parents and all their siblings, kids who became orphans in a matter of hours. The youngest survivor was a 5-month-old baby, too young to remember any of it, but he'll grow up knowing that he was there, that his mother died saving him, that his older brother didn't make it out. And then there are the questions that should have been answered, the questions that remain unanswered 20 years later. First question, who fired first? Who started the assault that triggered the explosions? The official Russian government investigation says it was an accident. They claim a terrorist accidentally stepped off the detonator pedal, causing the first explosion, and that Russian forces only stormed the building after that. But survivors inside the gymnasium tell a different story. Multiple witnesses say they saw something come through the window right before the first explosion. A projectile, a rocket-propelled grenade fired from outside. They say Russian forces initiated the assault. They say the government triggered the catastrophe. Independent investigations have found evidence supporting this version, but the Russian government has never acknowledged it. They've never released the footage from security cameras around the school. They've never released the audio recordings of communications between special forces units. Why? What are they hiding? Second question, why did authorities hide the terrorist demands? The official narrative was that these were irrational fanatics with no political goals, just murderers. But we know that's false. The terrorists handed over written demands on the first day, specific political demands related to the war in Chechnya. Russian officials received those demands, read them, and then lied to the public. They said there were no demands. Why lie about this? Because acknowledging political demands would mean acknowledging that the war in Chechnya, which had already killed tens of thousands of people, had consequences. It would mean admitting that Russian military actions created enemies desperate enough to attack a school. That's an uncomfortable truth. Much easier to portray the terrorists as senseless monsters than to grapple with the complex political reality that produced them. Third question, how many terrorists were there really? The official count is 32 militants. That's the number the government gave. That's the number in all the reports. But multiple hostages, people who were inside that gymnasium for 3 days, say they saw far more. One survivor, a woman named Ella Kesayeva, insisted she counted at least 70 different terrorists over the course of the siege. She said she saw suspicious people in and around the school even the day before September 1st, before the siege began. She testified that some of the terrorists seemed to have inside knowledge of the school layout. She raised questions about whether they had help from local accomplices. Her testimony was dismissed. The official number remained 32. Why the discrepancy? Were there local collaborators who escaped and were never caught? Did authorities fail to properly investigate because it would reveal security failures? Fourth question, and this is the most damning one, why was the assault carried out with such overwhelming force? Russian special forces used tanks. They used rocket-propelled grenades. They used flamethrowers against a building full of children. They knew there were more than 1,000 hostages inside. They knew the building was rigged with explosives. They knew that any use of heavy weapons could trigger a catastrophe. And they did it anyway. They fired into the building. They used weapons designed to destroy fortified positions against a school made of brick and wood. The European Court of Human Rights later ruled that Russia failed in its duty to protect the hostages. The court found that Russian forces used indiscriminate and disproportionate force. The Russian government appealed the ruling. They lost. But they never admitted wrongdoing. They never explained why they chose to storm the building that way. They never explained who gave the order. Mothers of Beslan, the women who lost children in the siege, they organized. They formed a group. They demanded answers. They demanded to meet with President Vladimir Putin. They demanded access to the classified files. They demanded transparency. For years, they were ignored. Then they were harassed. Some of them were threatened. Some were arrested on spurious charges. The government treated them as troublemakers, as people trying to undermine national security. These were mothers asking what happened to their children. And the state responded with intimidation. That should tell you everything you need to know about how much the Russian government values truth. I testified at one of the inquiries. I was 15 years old. I sat in a government office in front of men in suits and told them what I experienced. I told them about the bombs, about the thirst, about my sister. They nodded. They took notes. They thanked me for my testimony. Then they filed it away and nothing changed. The official narrative didn't shift. The classified documents stayed classified. Justice remained elusive. The survivors, the mothers, the families, we were told to move on, to heal, to stop asking questions, to trust that the government had handled the situation as well as possible, given impossible circumstances. But we were there. We know what happened. We know what we saw. And we know that the official story doesn't match reality. 20 years have passed since September 1st, 2004. 20 years since that morning when I woke up excited for school. Since I braided white ribbons in my hair. Since my sister twirled in her white dress. 2 decades. For most of the world, it's ancient history. Old news, a tragedy that happened a long time ago in a faraway place. But for me, for the survivors, time works differently. It feels like it happened yesterday, and it feels like a lifetime ago. Both at the same time. Sometimes I'll be doing something completely normal, grocery shopping or driving or watching television, and suddenly I'm back there, in that gymnasium. The smell hits me first, sweat and fear and smoke, then the heat. The crushing, suffocating heat. Then the sound of Lyuba's voice saying, "It's me." And for a few seconds, I can't breathe, can't move. I'm frozen in that moment. It passes eventually, but it always comes back. I still can't go into small spaces. Elevators are impossible. I take the stairs, even if it's 20 floors. Crowded rooms make my heart race. I start sweating. My hands shake. I know, logically, that I'm safe, that I'm not in danger. But my body doesn't know that. My body remembers being trapped, being unable to escape, being surrounded by people and feeling completely alone. Therapy helps, medication helps, but some scars don't heal. Some damage is permanent. I've accepted that. I'll carry this for the rest of my life. The nightmares, the panic attacks, the survivor's guilt that eats away at me every single day. Why did I survive when Lyuba didn't? Why did I live when 185 other children died? There's no answer to that question. Just random chance. Cruel, arbitrary luck. Most of the children who survived have struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, substance abuse. Some have attempted suicide. Some have succeeded. The psychological wounds from Beslan killed people years after the siege ended. Kids who made it out of that gymnasium alive but couldn't live with what they experienced, couldn't carry the weight of those memories. The Russian government provided minimal mental health support, a few counselors, some group therapy sessions. Then they were done. The survivors were expected to heal themselves, to just get over it, to be grateful they survived. But survival isn't the same as living. Some of us are just going through the motions, existing but not really alive. I'm telling you this story for a reason. I'm dragging myself back through the worst experience of my life, reliving trauma that I've spent 2 decades trying to process, because silence is dangerous. Silence is how atrocities get forgotten. Silence is how history gets rewritten. Silence is how the people responsible for failures and cover-ups escape accountability. 334 people died in Beslan, 186 children. Their names deserve to be remembered. Their deaths deserve to be investigated honestly. The families deserve answers, and the world deserves to know the truth, the uncomfortable, complicated truth about what happened and why. Terrorism thrives on making people feel helpless, on proving that nowhere is safe, that they can strike anywhere, anytime, and hurt the most innocent among us. The Beslan terrorists succeeded in that. They turned a school, a place that should represent safety and learning and hope for the future, into a tomb. But here's what they didn't count on. Survivors tell stories. We bear witness. We refuse to let the world forget. We make sure that the victims aren't just statistics, that they remain human beings with names and faces and families who love them. That's our power. That's how we fight back against the nihilism and the cruelty. By remembering, by speaking, by refusing to be silent. If you've watched this far, if you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want you to do one thing. Write a name in the comments. Any name from this story, Lyuba, Medina, Ruslan Betrozov, any name. Because when you write that name, when you take those few seconds to type it out, those people stop being just numbers. They become real again. They existed. They mattered. Their lives had meaning. And in some small way, by remembering them, by speaking their names, we keep them alive. That's all we can do now. Remember, bear witness, make sure this never happens again. Make sure that when governments try to hide the truth, when they try to bury uncomfortable facts, we push back. We demand answers. We refuse to let them forget September 1st, 2004, Beslan, Russia, school number 1. 334 lives ended. 1,128 people were taken hostage. More than half of them children. For 3 days, they lived through hell. And when it was over, the survivors were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives while the Russian government classified the evidence and moved on. But we're still here, still fighting for truth, still demanding justice, still remembering the ones who didn't make it out. My sister Lyuba lived for 9 years. She deserved to live for 90 more. She deserved to grow up, to fall in love, to have children of her own, to grow old. That was stolen from her, from all of them. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure the world knows their names, making sure their deaths meant something, making sure that somewhere, somehow, someone is held accountable. That's my promise to her, to all of them. I survived, and I'll make sure they're never forgotten.